Okay, so now we're going to go into a lot of detail on how to perform the downswing action. And there's a lot to talk about. Now, I mentioned that at the end backswing, you've loaded your pelvis, you've turned your upper torso more than your pelvis, and you've loaded your core muscles in your mid and upper torso, and you've got your powered package there. And then in the downswing, the essential motion is the left arm is going to be flung forward while maintaining an on-plane swing and an intact flying wedge. And the feeling is it's really a left arm swinging action, which Jim will now demonstrate. So he'll get to his end backswing position.
Left hand only?
Left hand only. And do a full swing. And notice he can generate a lot of power. And you can see that what is moving the left arm at that speed. And basically, if you look carefully what he's doing, you'll notice that the left shoulder socket is moving in space. And the left arm is essentially a lever that is being pulled by the left arm. Do it from down the line, and while keeping your intact flying wedge and an on-plane swing. Notice that the flying wedge is intact throughout the whole downswing. The club shaft is on plane, and he's powering the swing with that motion. Now, the question is, if you are supplying pivot power through the body motion, the question is, people say it starts from the ground up and then moves up. In other words, you're turning your lower body before your upper body. And is that mandatory? And I'm going to show you that it's not mandatory. In other words, in Jim's swing, he starts with a lower body rotation, but you could start with an upper body rotation and have a very static lower body. And what are the consequences of that? And we will examine his swing to see what happens is if he keeps his pelvis, which at address, more or less facing the ball target line, and virtually doesn't turn his pelvis in his backswing, and does virtually upper body rotation. So get to your end backswing position, and then turn your upper body as fast as you can. Okay, do it more, as fast as you can. And you'll notice that he can generate a lot of club head speed. But if you look at the club head path, you'll notice that it's out to in. In other words, go to your end backswing, and I'm going to pull it to show what happens. Then instead of coming from the inside, do your upper body turn. It's very slowly. You'll notice his hands go out, out, there, and then it goes inside. And it goes out to in across the ball target line. So one big advantage of starting with a lower body rotation is that it allows you to come from the inside, so you can have an in, from here, in to out swing. So it's in to square and then in again. So in to square to in. You don't want to come what's called over the top like that. So that's one important reason to turn the pelvis first. The second important reason to think of it is, if you hold that for me, is if you just think of it, you're in your backswing position and you want to turn your entire spine, lumbar spine, thoracic spine, like that, as fast as possible. It makes sense to generate a lot of swing power from the rotation of the pelvis, because the lumbar spine will turn with the pelvis. And then you supplement it by activating core muscles in your mid and upper torso to turn your upper body. So the sequence will be lower body rotation and then upper body rotation. And as I mentioned to you before, in your pivot motion, there is no sense of swaying. The feeling is you're rotating in a barrel. Now, I'm going to hold this, if you go back there to your end backswing position. I'm going to put this, and I mentioned previously that Jim favors a center pelvic loading motion. Now, in the downswing, do your regular pelvic motion all the way through. Notice that he stays in the center and he doesn't sway. This outer border of his left pelvis never gets outside his foot. It's a feeling of rotating in the barrel. Now, it's perfectly acceptable as you rotate to have a certain amount of motion to the left. And I'll discuss factors that determine how much left lateral motion you have. But the question is, if you would put that aside for me, the question is, what starts first in the downswing? So we come to the conclusion you want to start with the pelvic motion. An amazing number of golf instructors teach the concept as follows. They say that when you've got 80% of your center weight pressure on your right leg, they say push off the right leg towards the target. So you push off. And notice that how my thigh is tilted. So it's a left lateral, sometimes they refer to as a hip bump to the left, and then they say once you've bumped your hips, then turn. And I believe that's not the correct way to do it, because once you understand which muscles you should be using, you'll understand that really what you're going to do, and I'm going to explain it in great detail, is you're going to activate certain muscles which will rotate your pelvis away from your right femur. See, that's rotating. And that any left lateral motion occurs secondary to the rotation. So the prime thought is, let's turn the pelvis. Now, if you would bring me that pelvis there. Thank you. The key concept, and I would very much encourage you to read what I think is my best review paper on my golf website, which is called Critical Update, How to Optimally Rotate the Pelvis in the Downswing. Because in that paper I go into an enormous amount of detail about pelvic anatomy and which muscles are used. And I can't do that here, but I can only sort of simplistically do it. But basically, if you look at this representing your femur here, and we're going to do it from the back view, that as in the backswing you rotate the pelvis into internal rotation like that, then the distance between the head of the femur here and this area is called the greater trochanter, this bulge on the top of the femur. If your femur stays in the same position and your pelvis goes back, then the distance between your sacrum and this area of your pelvis is increased. So you stretch in muscles, and there are 6 muscles that are called the lateral pelvic rotator muscles that go from the inside of the sacrum, like the piriformis muscle, and then attach to the greater trochanter. So you stretch in those muscles in, we could put that back, thank you, at your end backswing. And if you stretch those muscles, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to activate the lateral pelvic rotator muscles on both sides. So what do they do? And I'm going to show you those lateral pelvic rotator muscles. I'm going to do the left side now. If your leg is in the neutral position like that, and you activate the muscles, they externally rotate the left femur in the hip joint. So you can see that that's what it does. However, if you contract the same muscles with all your weight on the left leg, it can't externally rotate the femur because you have your weight on your left foot. It will actually rotate the pelvis away. So in other words, look, it's rotating away from the target if I activated the left side. Now, at the end backswing position, if we have 80% of the weight pressure on the foot, and you activate the right-sided muscles, watch what happens, is the pelvis moves counterclockwise towards the target, like that. See how I'm doing that? Now, if you activate the left-sided ones at the same time, notice that it externally rotates the femur, because the femur on the left side is sort of floating in space, because you only have 20% of your weight pressure loading on the left. So if you activate the muscles, notice that this left knee moves to the target. Now, I'm going to get Jim to do that without a golf club, because we're going to look purely at his pelvic motion. So get to your in-back swing in a golfer's position. He's internally rotated over here. It's got some flex in the knee. This knee has come forward. Now activate both muscles and you'll notice what happens. This leg, femur, doesn't change its position much. But because the pelvis is rotating counterclockwise away from the femur, notice he goes in from internal rotation to external rotation. Now this femur, which was slightly adducted, is externally rotated by the left-sided pelvic rotator muscles, and you notice that the left knee moves to the target. So look what he looks like at what's called the P5 position. So from P4 to P5, do that. End back swing to P5. So here at P5, when the left arm is parallel to the ground, he's in dual external rotation. Now he's exaggerating, you don't have to do that, but you could find. And the feeling is, it's called the Sam Snead sit-down look. So if there was a bar stool behind you, you feel like you're sitting on this thing, and you get that look. And that happens in the early downswing. So we're only talking about the P4 to P5 position. Notice another aspect of this phenomenon. This time you'll do it from down the line. So there, he's in dual external rotation, but notice his head drops. I'm going to put my hand on his head at the end backswing position. So go to the end backswing position. And notice that it drops a few inches. In other words, what's causing his head to drop? And the reason is that it's not due to increased knee flexion, but it's due to increased flexion at the level of the hip joints. So as you go down, you'll often notice in professional golfers that the head drops. Not always. Some professional golfers don't have that phenomenon. In other words, they activate the muscles in both buttocks and they look like that, and without the head dropping. Now what causes the head to drop is due to activation of the iliopsoas muscles, which are the hip flexor muscles which run alongside the spine and attach to the inside of the thighs. And when those muscles are activated, which you don't even do consciously, this happens, it causes your lumbar spine to flex forward relative to your thighs, and therefore you get a little bit more of spinal bend. And that causes your head to drop, and that's perfectly acceptable. Unless we exaggerated. If you looked at Tiger Woods in his later career, in the last decade, he had a very big drop, and you could even flex his knees, and he got that, and his head dropped 6 inches. I think that's a disadvantage, because if you have an exaggerated head drop, and you get into this position at P5 where you have the Sam Snead look down, but you have so much drop, and in the second half of your downswing you have to jump up. I think that it's too exaggerated. Everything must be smooth. The transition from, which I'll discuss in a moment, from the early downswing to the late downswing must be very smooth. So a small amount of head drop is acceptable.
Jeff, let me give 1 point. One thing you can do is you can look at your belt line and see what happens to that as you swing. So as I take my backswing and I do this move, that belt line will go from more level to more pointing downward. Looks like this.
Yeah.
From down the line, looks like this. So if this gives you a little better reference point, use it. It may help.
Yeah. Now, go there again. And another point I want to point out, do it from face on. I mentioned that it is end backswing, that this pelvis is higher than this one. By P5, by the end of the early downswing, notice that the pelvis is relatively level. And both thighs seem to be flexed the same, both knees. So the key feeling is the activation of those two muscles. Now, you would say, well, you don't know where these muscles are, and you don't know enough about anatomy as a golfer to know how to activate it. So what swing thought could one have to do it? And I think the best swing thought is when you're at your end backswing position, think of this turning in a barrel without swaying or without towards the target. And feel that you're putting your left buttock backwards towards the tush line. Now, what is the tush line? And I'm going to demonstrate that with Jim. So, Jim's going to do it down the line, get to his end backward position, and I'm going to put this on the back of his right buttocks, right? And that is called the tush line. Now, when he starts the pelvic motion, what he's going to do is square his pelvis. So look, his pelvis is rotating counterclockwise 50 degrees. But notice that this right buttock still is touching the tush line. But now we're going to do it from the other direction. Okay, I want to show you what's happening with the left one. No, face the wall here, stand on this side. So we're doing an upline view. Okay, end backswing position. This is on the tush line. Look how far his left buttocks is away from the tush line. And what the feeling is when you start the downswing is the feeling of putting your left buttocks towards that line while keeping the right one on the line. See that? Notice how this one stays against the line and this one moves towards it. So by P5, now this one doesn't necessarily have to come all the way back. He's exaggerating it now. Do it with, by P5, it's moving towards it. The point I'm making is you have to activate the correct muscles. Now, a lot of people would say, this is the swing thought. I said to you, the swing thought you have is pulling this one back. And think of rotating. And your brain will activate the muscles in the right side without you think of doing anything. You don't have to think of pushing off the right foot. You don't have to think of kicking in with your knee. You don't have to think of twisting motions. It will happen. What you do need to think of is to keep weight pressure load on the foot. Because if you're at the end backswing like that with 80% of the weight pressure, in that first moment, watch me do it, I still have 80%. In other words, as you start the pelvic rotation, you must maintain the weight pressure. Because if you don't, you can't get the pelvis to rotate counterclockwise. But there's another problem which would happen if this leg became unweighted too soon and if you activate the wrong muscle. And I'm going to get Jim to demonstrate it without a golf club. So he'll just stand here, face down the line, and end backswing position. Now, do it the normal way, and you'll notice that this stays on the tush line. Now, if he had the swing thought of kicking in the knee, which requires an activation of the Gluteus Maximus, which is the big muscle in your buttock here, and that's the hip extensor muscle. Notice if it goes into hip extension, look what he's doing. You notice how he's standing up. This is leaving the line. So,
weight's going off the foot.
Right, the weight's going off the right foot, and this is, see, he's standing up. That, you lose your spine posture. The other thing that happens, stop at P5 with that motion. Get your pelvis to go forward. Notice where his pelvis is. That's called hip spinning. So your pelvis goes forward if you activate your gluteus maximum, your hips spin. And then when you try and to get your arms down, it's blocked by the right hip. So do that. See, the right elbow, which is coming from above, notice how he's standing up. This elbow cannot bypass the hip because now that's in the way. And he's stuck, and then you can't get through, and then you push everything to the right, or you try to flip it. So, if you activate it in the correct way, get your end back swing, notice there's space here in front of his right hip for the elbow, which is going to come down with doing what we call the power package. Look at this elbow going in front of the right hip. You see? And you can see that this buttock, by staying back, leaves room for that. So all these good things are happening if you do it in the correct manner. So you just hold that again. So, one thing golf instructors sometimes teach, they say, push off your right foot. The moment you think of pushing off the right foot, I think you're more likely to unload that prematurely. You don't want to do that. You don't want to ever think of kicking in your knee, because you see, kicking in the knee is activating the Gluteus Maximus, and then your pelvis comes forward and you stand up prematurely. So that's why I go to so much emphasis about the activation of the muscles. Now, there's another two golf instructors, Brian Manzella and Mike Jacobs, who teach the following way to start the downswing. They state that you need to feel that you're twisting your foot into the ground clockwise. So you, at the end backswing, you weight pressure load in the leg, and they say twist your foot, and that will cause your pelvis to move in the counterclockwise direction. And they actually got this idea from Dr. Kwan from Texas University, who believes that the body rotates in terms of the pelvis and upper body due to Newtonian forces, and these Newtonian forces come from variations in vertical ground forces, that as you press it into the ground first with the right foot, then with the left foot, and as you change this and with what's called shear forces in the horizontal plane, would produce Newtonian forces that turn your body. And I'm not sympathetic to that thinking. I believe very strongly that the correct way to perform a golf swing is to think in terms of human biomechanics. That it's the correct muscle action with the correct magnitude of muscle action and the correct sequence that gets your body to move correctly. So let's go to this idea. Now, where did Dr. Kwan actually come up with the idea that you need to twist your foot clockwise? And it comes from laboratory examinations with force pressure plates. And what they found in professional golfers and maybe skilled amateur golfers, I don't know who they studied, that there is this clockwise force happening into the ground at the start of the downswing. But you see, I believe that's not the cause of the pelvic rotation, it's the effect of the pelvic rotation. And this is important to understand, because if you understand this concept, that it improves your ability to perform the swing correctly. So why do I describe it as an effect? Let me give you an analogy. If I activated my triceps muscle in this arm, it extends my elbow. Now, when you extend your elbow and straighten your arm, the hand moves away from your shoulder. So if I get my hand close to my shoulder, and therefore the muscle is now stretched, and I activate the muscle, notice that the hand moves away from the shoulder. Now, why doesn't the shoulder move away from my hand? And the reason is that my hand is floating in space. It can easily move away when the muscle contracts. But it's hard to move my body because of the weight of the body. However, I'm going to get Jim to stand here, and I'm going to get close to him and put my hand against there, and all I'm going to do is to activate the triceps and watch what happens. So as I activate it, I'm trying to push my hand away from my shoulder as these muscles contract. But he's resisting me. And if I contract this with greater force, look what happens. See, my arm straightens, but look, my whole body and my shoulder moves away from my hand. In other words, if the impedance to movement is greater, so that my hand can't move away, as this muscle increases force, it will move the body away. And this is what's happening when we think of activating the lateral pelvic rotator muscles. I mentioned to you, normally, its prime function is to externally rotate the femur. So when you got to the end backswing and it's internally rotated and you've loaded it, and you activate the muscles, it tries to turn your femur, but your femur is fixed into the ground because you have spikes on. And if you weight pressure loading with 80% of your weight pressure down into the ground and you're in backswing and at the start of the downswing, it cannot turn. It tries to turn. And as it tries to turn, that's why you feel the effect of a clockwise shear force under your right foot into the ground. Now, why does the pelvis move in that direction towards the target? It's due to activation of those muscles, which can't rotate the femur, and as they contract with greater force, they cause the pelvis to move away from the femur. So it's the muscles activation and shortening between the points of their origin and insertion that causes the pelvis to rotate. It is not due to ground pressure forces causing Newtonian moment arms around your center of mass that do it. I don't believe, right? Now, another way I can prove it, come back to this position. Brian Manzell and Mark Jacobs say not only do you feel like you're pushing into the ground clockwise against the ground, but they say push against the ground. Feel you pushing up towards your ear to get, in other words, also generating vertical ground forces. But again, I don't believe pushing into the ground will make your pelvis turn. Let's go back to this analogy. Now, you're going to brace yourself. I'm going to put my hand against you, close, and I am now going to not activate my triceps, but I'm going to push into gym. Look at this. I'm pushing with more force. But notice, my shoulder is not moving away. I can push as hard as I want. It will only move away when I activate the triceps like this. See? As soon as I activated the triceps, my shoulder moved away from my hand. So it's the same thing in the start of your downswing. You can increase the pressure from 80% to 90% into the ground. Look, my pelvis is not turning. I'm pushing as hard as I can into the ground. So you must understand that it's the activation of your lateral pelvic rotator muscles which cause the pelvis to rotate counterclockwise away from a stabilized right leg. And you stabilize your right leg by weight pressure loading it. Right? Now, let's go to the question, of course, is what's better? To have a limited pelvic rotation, or like Randall Chambly says, to have a much greater degree of pelvic rotation and let your left heel come off the ground and adduct your knee. Now, I'll get you to demonstrate that. Without a golf, we're just going to do the pivot motion. Thank you. So, get your normal swing. I would argue that at this position, with about 40 to 50 degrees of pelvic rotation, you have stretched the lateral pelvic rotator muscles optimally to the correct amount. And now activate them and get a nice fast pelvic rotation.
On downswing?
Yeah. And go through all the way to a full swing. In other words, we're only talking about the early downswing, but once you activate them, they go, and there is enough thing. Now go to, let your 70 degrees of pelvic rotation, and this is elevated, so he's got 70 degrees of rotation, but you're not stretching the muscles more. Why? Because watch his right thigh. When people get a greater degree, notice that my kneecap's still facing forward. But when he turns more, 70 degrees, the right femur rotates more. Right? See there, the kneecap's pointing more outwards, which means the right hip joint is not in more internal rotation, which means the distance between the origin and insertion of the lateral pelvic rotation muscles is not greater. So I'm not surprised that modern day golfers do not do that. So if you look at Adam Scott and Jason Day, Rory McIlroy, they have a very limited pelvic rotation like Jim. And I'm saying you can have more. I'm not against the idea of looking like Bobby Jones like that, where he turns so much that this almost came up vertically. You can do it if you want, but I can understand from my perspective why modern day professional golfers are like Jim, have a much restricted hip turn. Now let's also address other issues. Is what moves first when you start the downswing? If you use the swing analyzer program and you looked, what do you notice? The pelvis move first, the knees, the ankles, and what you will notice is often, not always, that this knee will move towards the target before you notice the pelvic actually start rotating. And the reason I believe that happens, you could possibly demonstrate it, is you activate him from this position, go to end backswing. He's activating the lateral pelvic rotator muscles in both buttocks. So both are contracting now. This one, which was unloaded at the end backswing, can get this right femur to externally rotate, which causes the knee to move towards the target, before this one has enough power to rotate the pelvis away from your weight pressure loaded leg. And that's all that it means. So if your knee moves first, before you notice your pelvis rotating counterclockwise, it just simply means that it took less force when you activated both lateral pelvic rotator muscles. And the golfer who you see that in is Bubba Watson. You really see his knee. Now, there is a group of golf instructors belonging to a group called the SOMAX. I don't know exactly, remember what SOMAX stands for. And he argues that when I talk of starting from the lower body, I'm talking about a pelvic rotation. Notice I didn't mention the knees, the ankles, because I don't believe that any motion that happens below, and this is your lower body represented by the pelvis, I believe that occurs secondary to activation of pelvic girdle muscles, that you're not activating muscles below. Now the SOMAX golf instructors say the first thing that moves is this knee first, and that gives you leg power. And leg power increases swing power. And then they did this video comparing the SOMAX golfer, one of their golfers, to Rory McIlroy, and they were very critical of Rory McIlroy's swing compared to their golfer, because they said that Rory McIlroy doesn't have leg power, because he doesn't have that motion. And in my review paper on pelvic rotation, which I said was called Critical Update, How to Optimally Rotate the Pelvis, I discussed this issue. And I believe that you do not get any power from trying to turn at your ankle level or knee level. That the reason why your knee moves outwards like that is simply due to activation of the lateral pelvic rotator muscles. And that occurs first. Now, let's talk about another issue. I would like you to hold this for me, thank you, on the outer border of my pelvis. There, under my foot. Now, at my end backswing, I'm in this position, center loaded, or you could be like Gary Woodland, right loaded. Now, when I activate these rotary muscles, I feel like I'm just turning in a barrel. But think about it. If you rotate with a lot of force and this leg's unloaded, notice how this knee moves towards the target, which means that my pelvis will move a little bit towards the outer border of the barrel, if you think I'm rotating in a barrel. So there is a certain amount of left lateral sway motion by a few inches, you see. And if you right load, like Gary Woodland or Mickey Wright, who I gave as example, when they do the same motion, they have a bit more left lateral motion while they're rotating. Now, what I don't believe you should do is this. So some golf instructors say, the first thing you should do is not rotate, but shift your weight. Notice what's happening. My knee's hitting against that pole. In fact, some of them say they do this. They put this 4 inches outside like a wall, and there's a golf instructor called Andrew Rice, and he says try to bump your hip into that wall, which is 4 inches away, like this. And I think you should never do that. In other words, it doesn't start with a left lateral movement. You feel like you're turning in a barrel, and you only have a degree of rotation, left lateral sway motion, but the pelvis, the outer border of the left pelvis, never gets outside your left foot in this type of swing. I will discuss later, if I remember, that if you hit in wedges, you don't use the same pelvic motion. So if you're 30, 40 yards from the green, instead of standing wide like that, you might stand only 6 to 12 inches apart. And you'll notice that professional golfers do sway. See that? This gets outside my foot. And that's a sway motion, which is actually good because it changes your hand-hold path, which I'll discuss later. But in your full golf swing with a driver and most of your irons, the feeling is rotating within a barrel. Now let's go into the question of left loading, like the stack and tilt golfers instruct, that at your end backswing, you should have 60% of your weight pressure in your left leg. As I said, I believe you should have 80% here. If you had 60%, in other words, they move the pelvis to the left, so they left loading the pelvis in the backswing, and they feel that the end backswing 60%, and then they try to turn. I believe it's not possible, because if you weight pressure load this leg, and you try to activate the lateral pelvic rotator muscles while you weight pressure loading the left leg, it will actually turn your pelvis away from the weight pressure loaded leg, which means it's away from the target, not towards the target, right? So they can't use the same muscle. So what do they do to solve the problem? What they do is, if you look at a stack and tilt golfer, the end backswing position, or VJ Trolio, in his teaching with the left load, is what they do is they activate both Gluteus Maximus muscles and they thrust the pelvis forwards like that. In Mike Bennett and Andy Plummer in their book on stack and tilt swing refer to this as tuck your butt under your spine. Now, if you would demonstrate that motion from down the line, tuck your butt under your spine with a left thing. That's exactly the hip spinning, standing up motion that I believe one shouldn't do. Now, of course, they try to keep their spine angle, but I'm saying that's why I don't favor a left loading pelvic motion if you weight pressure load the left side, because then you can't perform the rotary motion as I described. Now, the other point I'm going to mention at this point is how fast does the pelvis move in the downswing, and when does it reach its maximum speed? A lot of golf instructors, yeah, you can hold that for me, have this idea that you must retain your pelvis so fast that it reaches its maximum speed in the late downswing or at impact. And it doesn't make sense biomechanically that should happen. And the reason is, what is actually happening in your downswing? I mentioned we've been talking about the early downswing, which is from P4 to P5. It's called the hip squaring phase. So from there you might be 40 or 50 degrees rotated. Now you square your hips through activation of the lateral pelvic rotator muscles, and your arms get down to that position. Now, in the mid-downswing, it's perfectly acceptable from here for this right buttocks to start leaving the line. But by then you've got your elbow down in front of your right hip, and it can start moving forward like that. Because at impact, you'll notice it's going to be about 40 or 50% open. But if you look at professional golfers, and Rory McIlroy, who has the fast, I think, recorded pelvic rotational speed, reaches his maximum speed by P4.5, which is about here. It's already reached the maximum speed. And why does it then stall? In other words, why does the pelvis, you'll notice it's open at this point, it was squared P5, about 30, 40 degrees open by P5.5 or P6, and then it doesn't open more between P6 and impact. And the reason why it slows down are two phenomena. One, once you've activated your lateral pelvic rotator muscles and they've shortened, they don't have any more power to keep turning you. Now you could artificially get a bit more swing power by activating your gluteus muscle, but that puts you at risk of standing up through impact or hip spinning. So that's one reason. The other reason is the weight pressure shift. So I said that you were 80% here. By the time you get to P5 there, the Sam Snead sit-down look, you might be 50-50. Then by the time you get from P5 to P6 here, you might have 70% there, or even 80%. And as you weight pressure load the left leg, and you've got more pressure down into your left foot, and you started to contract the extensor muscles in your thigh and in your buttocks, it impedes further rotation of this thigh. And it's a natural. In other words, you don't stall your pelvis on purpose, but that very naturally happens, right? So if you demonstrate how open your pelvis is at impact, you see that it's about 40 degrees open, and you feel the increased pressure in that leg, right, at that point in time.
Absolutely.
So what happens in your late downswing, and I noticed that Jim didn't do it there, but as you transfer weight in between now the mid to late downswing, from about here to here, this leg straightens due to activation of the vastus lateralis. These are the muscles in front and the side of your thigh. They extend, straighten the left leg. Plus you're activating the left gluteus maximus, right? If you demonstrate that, extend those two muscles. And notice what happens. If this leg gets straighter, and you're activating your gluteus, notice that the left hip joint now is higher than the right. That's called a positive O factor. So go to P5 again. Now at P5, the pelvis is more or less level. Now notice that this side's going higher. Now there's a great advantage to that, which I'll explain in detail afterwards, is that if you would hold that, so as this leg straightens, at the same time you're extending the left side of your body, and then the shoulder goes up, like that. And then I'll explain how that's a big advantage in itself, but that comes in the late downswing. I've been talking mainly about the early mid-downswing. The second question we're going to go into next is the question is, when does the pelvis start to rotate? And I believe you have an option. If you look at some professional golfers, while the club is going back between P3.75 and P4, that last bit, you can already see the pelvic rotating counterclockwise. And that phenomenon, where the pelvis is rotating while your upper body is actually still maybe even moving back a bit, your arms are moving back, gives you an increased degree of X factor, and it's called dynamic X factor. So that's perfectly acceptable to do it that way. Start your pelvic rotation before you come to your end backswing position, which is defined as the time period when your club reverses direction. But the other option is to do what Jim prefers to do, is to wait to P4 and then turn the pelvis, and both are acceptable. Then we're going to start now talking about upper torso rotation, because if you return your pelvis before your upper body, the question is, when do you start turning your upper body and how do you do it, and all the issues, because now we're going to have to discuss upper body rotation and also what effect it has on the arms, because the early mid-downswing you perform a phenomenon called slot in the power package. And I'll move on to that next topic now.
Let me go ahead and just say one thing. Now the pelvis is king with this, like Jeff has said. And when I start my downswing, just try to keep in mind that it's not the knees that you're trying to bend here, or to think of the feet. All I'm thinking about are my hips. Okay, and you can see my belt line going down a little bit. But when I was learning this, I kind of went back and forth because on a couple swings, I felt like I was thinking of my knees. You know, try to get that Sam Snead sit down. And that doesn't work. You've got to think of your hip and your hips in this manner here, and that causes the knees to bend. The knees are reactive. Okay, they're just reacting to the pelvis.
Yeah. And this idea of getting the belt buckle to turn down is equivalent to what's called anterior pelvic tilt. So if you look at the two femurs here, and this is your lumbar spine in this direction, as you activate the iliopsoas muscle, which goes from the spine to the inside, and this is little bulge here is called the lesser trochanter. When you activate the muscles, they pull the lumbar spine towards your thighs. So that causes increased anterior pelvic tilt. And that's what he's doing, right? Now, and that increased pelvic tilt is occurring at the level of the hip joints, and then the head drops. And there are some golf instructors who emphasize this phenomenon a lot, like Wayne Francisco, who teaches what he calls the pivot compression swing. And he really likes that idea of that. I am actually less in favor, because I've seen too many professional golfers like Tiger Woods exaggerate it. And they bob up and down. And I believe if you want to be a consistent golfer, you want to have the feet in, you're rotating in a barrel, your head's in the same position, and you're not swaying from side to side, but you're also not bobbing up and down too much this way. So I say be careful about exaggerating it. Now, Jim incorporates it in his swing, and he does it well, and it's still very well within what I believe an acceptable amount.
Yeah, sometimes I will exaggerate it during my practice swing, because this is something I learned recently. I used to be, an early extender. So in my practice swing, many times I'll just do this as I'm rehearsing before my shot. You can see my butt going back. I get to here and then I do this. And I exaggerate it a little bit because I always used to do this. So then when I swing, it's usually about right. So.
Yeah. And his pelvic motion is absolutely perfect. And we'll move on to the next topic, which I'll discuss if you put that aside.